Let's learn about some of the supplies that you need. Most projects are going to require you to have the yarn, a certain size crochet hook, needles, and scissors. Your needles will be used to weave in your yarn ends, and we'll get to that later. First, let's talk about your crochet hooks. Crochet hooks come in a variety of sizes from pretty small to pretty big. The hooks that I have range from size D all the way up to size P. Hooks usually go by a letter, but they also go by a size in millimeters. So the D hook is 3.25 millimeters, while the P hook is 10 millimeters. And this is not the largest hook there is, just like D is not the smallest hook there is. These are just all the hooks that I happen to have. Right now I have several J hooks. If you find a favorite hook size, you might end up having several of that size. Different companies of different companies of hooks make them in different ways, whether it be the hook at the end is formed differently, or the handle, like this one has a wooden handle. You might find that you like them in certain ways, so you tend to stock up on that type of hook. The hooks down here, the D, the E, and the F, and smaller hooks like C, are mostly used for projects like baby sweaters, things that would use really, really lightweight yarn, doilies, lacier items. If you have something really lacy you're going to make for yourself and it's using a really lightweight yarn, you'd probably use one of these smaller hooks. The larger hooks, such as the P and the Q, will mostly be used with bulky yarns. Some of the projects that you might use a bulky yarn for would be some types of scarves, maybe certain sweaters that are really heavy. There's a lot of photography props like bowls and cocoons and hammocks that people will crochet using a bulky yarn and a P or a Q hook. The hooks in between, from about the F or the G on up to the J, will probably be the hooks you use most often if you're going to be making afghans, baby blankets, hats, items for around the house. These would definitely be the ones you use the most. My favorite sizes are the H and the J. I just like the way that they yield projects as far as how tight the stitches are, how close together they are, the size they come out, that sort of thing. Now let's get into the different types of yarn you're going to see. There are cotton yarns. You can use cotton for anything that you want. I like that you can find a wide variety of colors in cotton yarn. They have really bright colors, they have pale colors, they have variegated colors, self-striping colors. There's all kinds of possibilities with cotton yarn. Also, you can use cotton on anything that's going to get wet, like a dishcloth, washcloths for your children to use when they bathe. You can make pot holders, you can make towels. But like I said, you can also use them for anything you want, but it's also the most durable yarn as far as something that's going to get wet and dried often. Aside from cotton, there is acrylic yarn. Most of the yarn that you'll find in craft stores like Joann's and Michael's will be acrylic. You'll see a small selection of cotton, a small selection of wool, but a lot of the yarn is acrylic. I like acrylic because it stretches. When I make hats for children, I like them to stretch so they can wear them longer. They're more likely to fit them if the yarn is stretchy. So acrylic is a lot stretchier than the cotton yarn. There's also wool yarn. This yarn here is actually only 20% wool. It's mostly acrylic, but it feels more like wool and it looks more like wool than other yarns. Hook size will definitely affect the size of your project, but another thing that matters a great deal is the weight of the yarn. It's very important to follow a pattern exactly the way it's written as far as the hook size that it tells you to use and the weight of the yarn. If you use a lighter yarn than specified, your project will probably come out smaller. while if you use a heavier yarn than specified, your project will probably come out bigger. If you use a smaller hook size than specified, your project will probably come out small, and if you use a larger hook than what's specified, your project will probably come out big. The categories of yarn range from about 1 to 6. 1 and 2 will be really, really light yarns. They'll mostly be used for things like doilies, really lacy items. You can make some Christmas ornaments out of it. Just really, really lightweight stuff. This here is a category 3. It's considered a light yarn. You can find the weight of the yarn on the label, usually somewhere around the barcode or around the information where it tells you how many yards and how many grams the yarn is. There's a picture of a skein of yarn. It has a number 3 on it, and it says the word light. So that's how we know that this is a lightweight yarn. The strands are really thin. This would be used for a sweater, something lightweight. You'd use a smaller hook size for it. There are patterns for baby blankets that use a lightweight yarn. They'd be good for spring or summer babies who need some kind of blanket but they don't need something really heavy. So that's what this lightweight yarn is mostly used for. Next you have your category 4 yarns. This is considered medium weight. And again, you can find the picture of the skein on the wrapper, and it has a number 4 and says medium. This yarn is a little bit thicker, a little bit heavier than the category 3, but it's still not too heavy. This is what I use the most when it comes to blankets, hats, scarves. I tend to go for this category 4 yarn. It's just right for those projects. Next you have a category 5. This is a bulky yarn. It's a lot thicker than the category 4. It's going to yield a thicker project. This yarn is nice for winter babies who need a nice warm chunky hat or a nice chunky blanket. That's definitely going to keep that cold air out. There's many different kinds of category 5 yarns, different kinds of bulky yarn. This yarn has a completely different texture. It looks a lot bigger, but it would yield about the same size project. This is also a category 5 bulky yarn. You can hardly tell the strands because it's just so furry and fuzzy. But this is a bulky yarn. Both of these yarns are pretty hard to work with. Anything that looks like this I would recommend avoiding until you're a pretty advanced crocheter. Even now, I try to stay away from these. Once you get your chain going and you need to find your hole and single crochet in it or double crochet in it, it's really hard to find. You can't see them with all this fur and all this extra yarn in the way. It's really hard to see. Next you have your category 6. This is a super bulky yarn. This one actually doesn't have a picture of a skein with the number, but it does say super bulky weight on the label. Because it's mostly acrylic, it's really easy to care for. It's usually wash safe and dry safe. You can put it in your washing machine, your dryer. I try to hang everything up just in case. I don't really like to put anything in the dryer that I've handmade. This yarn is very, very thick, very bulky. It's going to yield pretty big projects. You're going to need to use a large hook on it. Some projects might call for a J or a K, but you'll probably see mostly N, P, Q, really large hook sizes for this bulky yarn. When you go to a manufacturer's website, such as linebrand.com, you can find patterns and they'll tell you what kind of yarn to use for it. So they might say, this scarf uses this specific yarn, and that way you'll be able to find patterns. If you decide you like this super bulky yarn, you could just go look for patterns that use this yarn. You can make those items. Those websites are really easy to use, and it's really easy to find free patterns that way. Most of the labels will also have patterns on them. They'll have a picture on the front, and inside the label it'll have the pattern instructions for making that item you see in the picture. When you're going to start on a project, if it's a large project, some kind of sweater, scarf, blanket, afghan, and you're going to need several skeins of the same color, it's really, really important to check the label for the dye lot although the color has the same name, it's the exact same brand, same everything, even looks exactly the same, they can be slightly off, and when you change colors in your project, you will be able to see that difference. So it's important to buy all the yarn that you're going to need for a project at one time, if it's going to be the same color throughout. And you'll want to check the dye lot. On the label near the barcode, it'll have the words lot or dye lot, and it'll have a 5 or 6 digit number, and that'll be the specific color's dye lot. You want to match those numbers up. Say you need 3 or 4 skeins of this blue yarn. You want to make sure all 3 or 4 skeins have the same dye lot number on them. That way when you change colors throughout your project, it's going to look exactly the same, and you won't be able to tell that you changed colors there.